So, let me introduce our last speaker. Eric Compas is a professor from UW-Whitewater. He specializes in human-environment interactions. He's with Geography and Geology at UW-Whitewater. He's also director of Pangea, which is the UW-Whitewater GIS Center that was set up 3 years ago, something like that. He's worked for the National Park Service and Yellowstone National Park. He's researched private land development and conservation issues. He loves being outside, right? When he's not teaching or writing, you can find him wandering around outside, kayaking, biking. That's what it says in your bio. So Eric's going to talk to us today about undergraduates in the cloud. Eric?
Thank you, Howard, and thanks for the chance to speak with everyone today. Being the end of the day here, I realize that you're saturated, and I mostly want to tell a story about what we've tried to accomplish with this GIS Center. And so the focus is a little bit more on education, and then try to pontificate at the end about what I think this means for undergraduate education in geography, and a little more broadly about some of the challenges that academia is facing in terms of relevancy to broader society. It's a little bit about the struggles that I face as a PhD trained, with blinders on, focused on research, and going into an institution where most of my students are not going to be researchers. And how do I come to terms with the students that I'm actually training? And this is kind of the resolution to that. And I've got a couple of handouts. One is our brochure. Thank you, Kieran. And another is the learning objectives that we developed for the students that work at the center. And I'm kind of interested in a little bit of feedback on these learning objectives, and it'll tie into what I'm going to kind of finish with. So briefly the story, and then a little bit of kind of the lessons learned and some of the challenges we faced. We were approached by a group on our campus that were pulling together an economic development administration, a federal agency, a larger grant, a $6 or $7 million grant, kind of in response to the economic recession, also to the 2008 floods, of trying to do something with southeastern Wisconsin to support economic development. There happened to be one of the rainmakers as part of this grant who knew something about GIS, which is phenomenal. We're making progress, folks. And she approached us and said, hey, I know GIS has a lot of potential, and I think it could help economic development in the region. We know that there are a lot of resources that large organizations, Harley-Davidson, some of the large companies have access to that we think can benefit smaller companies. So maybe this could be part of our package. So imagine taking different partners within the region. We had a rapid prototyping lab. We had the Small Business Development Center. Somebody worked with global business and trying to piece those resources together to kind of have a one-stop shop for businesses interested in economic development, with the overall goal of increasing jobs and economic development within our region. So I had to kind of face this question. This was not in my area of interest, not business development, economic development. I like nature, I like being outside. I don't know much about it. But it was tough to tell my dean that I was going to pass by on $500,000 of funding. I also questioned, I was pre-tenure at this point, and I was told this was not going to count any towards tenure. Research still mattered. I still had to produce some publications. So a part of me said, this is stupid. Stay away, say no, and a smarter person probably would have done that. But again, looking at our students, I realized that our GIS program needed some updating. I saw this as an opportunity. Well, maybe this will mean a lot for education. Allow me to experiment with the idea of giving my students a lot more applied experiences. I've worked for other GIS centers at larger institutions where it's mostly master's students or PhD students, and let's give it a try at an undergraduate institution. So I dove in, eyes open, eyes closed, I'm not sure. So this is what we started with, which was pretty much nothing. We had no servers, we had no, we didn't even have access to business analysts at the time, so we didn't have much business data. It had been about 10 years since I had done any web-based GIS. It wasn't part of our curriculum. So this was a lot of trying to figure out what to do next and figuring out where to go. What do you do First, you come up with a logo. We wrote a PD for a program manager, went through that process, hired a program manager, talked to the IT folks, figured out how we were going to get access to servers, and kind of pieced things together. I realized this was something like starting a business, so I talked to the people that were part of this grant and said, all right, you need to help me. Your first business that you need to talk with is ours. How do I start this? Well, of course, pull up some template online, write a business plan. So we did that to give us some idea of where we wanted to go with this thing. Part of that I knew required changing our curriculum. So I did a couple things. One is I knew I needed some web GIS skills, so started looking at ways of doing that and retraining myself. And I also looked through job announcements. So got on whatever job board I could find, looking for GIS-related jobs, and start ticking off what people are looking for. Geo databases, a lot of web-based GIS. The desktop analyst that we were training, I didn't find that anymore. We've got enterprise GIS people and web people web GIS people that were being looked for. So we changed the class. We wrote a new class that had some of these skills as part of the training, so I could train students that I could actually then hire. We got some space, we got some computers, a plotter, a scanner, coffee machine, Nerf guns, everything you need in a functioning lab. We got access to our virtual cloud on campus and figured out how to work that. We made our first map, so a little bit of test, like, all right, can I get students to do any of this work? They're not trained in programming. I was at first a little bit, I wanted to shy away from Esri, and really wanted to go open source, so tried to get to see what I could do with students who were never trained in computer science. Could they learn JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and first map using Google Maps API? They could. It took a lot of work, and the code was something we would not want to show anybody. But we managed to get it to work, and I realized that path was going to probably run into some challenges. Actually had our first client, made a map that ended up on a website for the Wisconsin Business Incubator Association. You could click on things and little drive time polygons would show up. We were really excited that we were pulling off some of this stuff. And this was, a lot of what we do in these types of projects is tell a student that this is what you have to do and give them no guidance on how to pull that off and see what they do on their own. And a lot of these students were coming through. We got another client, Rock County, to help with some pretty traditional analysis, doing some crime mapping within their communities. We got our first business client that was looking at trying to expand marketing in a particular new product area. And so this is straight up business analyst tools, but trained ourselves in kind of an iterative process with them of what was useful. We got kind of fancy. We made a model trying to identify high priority areas across the country, combining 4 or 5 different factors. That didn't resonate at all with their sales team or their managers. It was the very simple 1 or 2 metrics, simple maps that got attention and were useful. So we ended up doing quite a bit of repeat work with this particular company. We upped our game a little bit. We decided to get fancy with a name. We worked with the marketing group on campus. They had a design person, so we got a fancy logo. We got a fancy name. They made us the brochure that I handed out. We actually found out that people thought we were now an independent consulting business that had very little to do with the university. With the designers, this is where I like the way that designers think. This broke the whole paradigm for them to have UW-Whitewater appear at all on this page. And that was just me insisting, I don't think they're going to think we're part of a university. UW-Whitewater was really tiny on the back page, and that's all that we had. And for a while, we actually fought this challenge that, all right, we're a nonprofit, and we'll maybe talk a little bit about the business side of this and some of the things we brought up for the Geospatial. Came with some fancy brochures to make us look more professional, and we're hopefully backing that up with substance. Ended up doing quite additional reports for different companies. Some of the partners in the grant came through and got us connected to companies where we started producing some of this business analyst stuff. I was skeptical whether or not this was, like, what were people finding out of this that was useful. So we tried to figure out from our clients where this was useful and where this wasn't. It's easy to inundate them with a 200-page report from business analysts. I was doubtful they ever read through all that. We did some traditional cartography. And here's where we found out that undergraduate GIS and geography students, while they can develop some cartographic skills, if you pair one of those students with a design student, things get much nicer and look much better. So we started hiring students that were not just geography students. Hired IT students, some design students to see what we could produce in combination. And that got them working in teams and producing higher quality work. We won a few awards. One of the group of students signed up to map your campus through Google Maps. So we made a lot of modifications for free for Google. And combine that with our campus is designated as the campus that's supposed to be the most accessible for students with disabilities. So we made a little video that went along with this and managed to get third place. Our brochure, the designer Renee Melton that did that for us, won an international competition with that. So got a little kudos on campus, which is always nice. Made some missteps along the way. Some of the things we tried to maybe a little overreach of what we thought we could do for some of our clients. This was an attempt to make a kind of an interactive web training database system for all these different groups that we were working with. We had an IT student and a GIS student working together, and it never quite congealed into something that would work. And we kind of realized, all right, for a lot of these challenges that we're facing, probably simple is better. And this is where we started to turn away from these hardcore coding things to more Esri tools and GUI interfaces and saying, all right, we'll use some of these templates that Esri has out there. No, it doesn't do everything that we want, but we know we can pull it off and it's stable. Learn a little bit more about what our clients were interested in. So a lot of the businesses, they wanted to be on a map. They thought we controlled somehow Google Maps, and that really we kind of stepped away from us necessarily doing things for them and showing them how they had a lot of tools at their own disposal. So put on our little program with our mapping minions to train people how to get access and get themselves on Google Map and some of the social media tools. And we found this is one of the best ways that we could help businesses improve their locatability, their spatial presence on the web. And we're talking to a lot of people, we would go to meetings, we'd actually take note of how many people would be carrying smartphones. A lot of business owners are in their 40s and 50s, and they come grumble about their teenagers and their smartphones and don't necessarily realize that this is key to a lot of their client base. We expanded the types of things that we did. We have 3 Trimble GPS units, and found out that, and this goes back to some of the things that traditionally other GIS centers have done on other campuses. We have students that go around and do mapping of assets for different communities. So City of Elkhorn, Walworth County have hired our students to go around and map signs and so forth. But that still requires them to gain quite a bit of experience with differential GPS. We tried to put a lot of this into local government model. We found out that when we did that, the organizations that grabbed the data didn't know what to do with it when it was in the local government model. So they had to deal with some pretty sophisticated geodatabase concepts when doing the GPS mapping. Another bigger project for the city of Milwaukee, they needed to, they approached us about optimizing their trash pickup. And the key thing was that the road network they had did not have alleyways. And up to this point, they were still figuring out where to put their routes with a bunch of paper maps and drawing polygons. And so we kind of gave them a little bit of consulting advice about how the limits of what ARC could do with routing. We knew this was beyond what ARC could do and that they were going to have to go to another vendor. So we ended up doing some of the back-end networking. So we built the network that they were eventually going to use RouteSmart to do their final route allocation. And this was a pretty significant effort, and it was one of these cases where we really had to bring the team together. We had a deadline that we faced, and this is a week of crazy editing, setting up a version database and having every person drop everything else that they were doing in order to do turn restrictions and edits, and then QC in order to make sure that we were meeting some deadlines on this project. Some of our work became internal, so connecting to what from the group from Minnesota and Geospatial. We've had a lot of interest from on-campus entities, our facilities folks, our Center for Students with Disabilities, about us doing work for them. And going back to our original goal of trying to offer services to off-campus entities, I've actually resisted trying to do on-campus work. We've kind of built up this set of guidelines or our practices that when I go to a meeting, and this is one of probably the biggest exceptions, I almost always bring students with me. So if we meet with a client, it's a business client, they're with me in sport coats, sitting at the table, learning what it's like to be in a business meeting, meeting those people that they're later going to email and be accountable to and deliver a final product. They may talk to them on the phone. So we started seeing some of the professional skills that these students were learning and really emphasizing that. We're also finding a lot of our clients liked the idea that they were providing a learning experience for our students. So not only were they getting a useful product, but it became part of our marketing, something that's not in that brochure at all, that they felt like they were helping create the next generation of geospatial people. And now we would revise that brochure, really emphasize that win-win relationship. And we emphasize that in our conversations, in our contracts, that this work is being done by students. But we have done a couple of internal projects. This is our first mobile application. So the Center for Students with Disabilities was interested in could we use mobile technology to help new students on campus on wheelchairs navigate between classes and avoid all the barriers. So barriers, stairs, steep hills, curb cuts. So with the combination of air photos and GPS, we created a campus walkway network, and then used a combination of Esri's JavaScript API and jQuery in order to create a mobile app that detects your location. You select a building that you want to go to or a series of buildings. You can actually plan out your whole day, and then it'll route you throughout campus to avoid any of those barriers, and then also track your movement along that path. One of my hopes with the center is I'd pick up something research related. I've yet to get a single publication out of the center. And this probably has some potential. We've kind of, because we've been so busy, kind of dropped the ball. This was a demonstration project. It hasn't seen as much use as I would like. We had a group of disabled students use this and identify a lot of issues. When you're carrying around, or you've got a smartphone or a tablet mounted, you got sunlight reflecting off that. We had to have a much higher contrast with some of these things. I couldn't see it. And so there were a few things that we had to fix that we would do later, and I think there's a possibility to get some research out of the usability of a tool like this. We tried to expand that inside the buildings and actually built 3D models to actually route people inside the buildings. Kind of successful with one building within the initial terms of the contract. Getting that into the mobile environment proved to be, we couldn't use, Esri had some multi-floor templates that we could never get to work, so we kind of dropped that idea, at least for the moment. Some of the other on-campus work that we're doing, we could be swallowed up by our facilities department. And again, kind of resisting some of the potential work that exists out there. Our facilities people are really excited. Anything that we show them, they want. And so we've helped them take a lot of their AutoCAD data, convert it to GIS, built an internal web map server for them that allows them to see their own data, and then in some cases edit it. So they were doing a retro on all their exterior lights to convert them to LEDs. And so we made a tool where their electricians could go in and change out the light bulbs as they were doing physically on the map and show progress. Again, obviously using some of the templates. This is more of our new model. don't reinvent the wheel. Esri's got templates to do this that are fairly good. So most of this can be done with a GIS student without any coding at all. Campus master planning, similar tool for room allocation. So we had people that were going around clicking on rooms and figuring out, all right, trying to tell the difference between an office and a storage closet. Sometimes that's not so easy to do for faculty. Another example of working with local businesses. We did this training for the city of Whitewater about how their businesses could, quote, get on the map. And we did some modifications as part of a contract to underlying Google Maps, adding a lot of features and parts that weren't there. But they wanted more than that, so we created an interactive map that will be embedded on various city websites. And so this is kind of sitting out by itself, but we knew it had to be flexible. So here we've got an example of something that involved coders, and probably there's more IT students working on this than there were GIS students in order to get our pop-ups and everything to work. This isn't quite done, but we're getting close. And to kind of finish off this showcase, probably the biggest project that we've worked on, and this is a collaborative effort. This is a project that involved the State Cartographer's Office and UW-Madison Cart Lab. I think it was originally, someone that approached you, Howard, about this project. So the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, you may have heard in the news, they've had some issues about how they give out money. And so they approached the group and said, can you help us with a map? We want to tell a story. Tell a story with a map about where our efforts are going, or grants and so forth. And we said, we think we can help you with that. So a lot of the design was done by the cartography lab, the wireframing, and then our students, which was a combination of GIS. We had about 4 different students that were working on this project and pulled off most of the coding. I'll say something about our project manager and our program manager in a moment. This is a case where we had to go beyond what the students were capable of. We kind of pushed Dojo to the limit of what it'll do. In some cases, in Esri's JavaScript API, we found out there were some things that we needed to accomplish that it couldn't. So we had to kind of go beyond what Esri had programmed into the API. But we've got dynamic choropleth maps, so it's based on the filter. It's doing a dynamic layer that creates different choropleths, so it's on the fly aggregating whatever projects exist there. If you click on a particular geography, be it a county, you can switch to Senate and Assembly districts. You can generate summaries, so this produces a PDF report that summarizes the projects that are within whatever geography is selected. And we're pretty proud of this. So this is probably kind of the biggest thing that we've done so far. And again, this is mostly undergrads pulling off something that would definitely, I think, qualify as professional level work. A little bit about what we're doing next. Our initial grant has run out, so I don't necessarily have to do business stuff anymore. So I'm trying to return some of the natural resources that I'm interested in. In one of my classes, we experimented, like a lot of groups, with balloon aerial photography. So we applied for one of the Wisconsin NASA space grants. We just found out we got money to buy a drone. Please don't shoot it down if you see it flying around your place. And you may have heard there's some new restrictions in our state about what we can and can't do with drones. So we're looking forward to experimenting with some of that. And I'm interested in getting back into some of the natural resources. What I think is going to happen is that we're going to end up, we're off our initial funding. We're looking at about $100,000 worth of contracts coming up in the next year. So things are looking pretty rosy in terms of our finances. I think we're going to end up having a bread and butter of stuff that we do for state agencies or local government and some businesses that helps potentially pay for some of the natural resources stuff that I'm more personally interested in. So that's kind of a showcase of what we've done, what we've accomplished, and kind of the story about how we got here. A little bit on the lessons of what we've learned trying to get to this point. I've found out that a program manager is essential. That these students are kind of running off by themselves and will head off in different directions. And the program manager, and a lot of running this place day in, day out, a faculty member cannot do. We've got too many other responsibilities. And the program manager is the person that's really going to, again, most of this work done by students, but be the conductor, the orchestra conductor that's going to keep them moving in the right direction, working in teams effectively, having weekly meetings to make sure everybody's on task, identifying problems before they get too large, keeping an eye on the servers, on making sure that the servers are running, and so forth. We've also found out that we do, while students are really capable, and I think one of the lessons is that undergraduate students, and not to belittle Whitewater students, but we're not, sometimes the caliber of students that I get, I find a little bit surprising. That sounded bad. But it's amazing what they're able to accomplish in the work that I get out of them in this setting as compared to what I see in the classroom. I've had several students that have gotten C's out of my classroom, and the program manager does the hiring. So at one point he said, I really want to hire this guy. And I was like, this guy, no, he didn't do very well in the classroom. I don't want to hire him. And he insisted, so we hired this guy. He turned out one of the best employees we had. Put him in a professional setting. He worked really well with clients, and he showed a tenacity to figure things out on his own that he never showed in my class. And so I've kind of thought maybe I'm not that good at judging who's going to be successful once they're out here. And in this setting, there's a little bit more of a cauldron for me to figure out who's going to be successful and who's not. We really emphasize and try to figure out what the skills each student has and is interested in building. I have some that have the eye for cartography, try to emphasize those skills. Some that, once they get a glimpse of coding, that's their cup of tea and they head down that path. And then putting together teams. So I never have a student working in isolation on a project. There's always a team that's with an IT student, with a design student, and we're trying to look at how we can better facilitate that across campus with some other centers that exist. Kind of a geeky bit here. Some of the things on the back end, again, that students have pulled off. We're running on 6 or 7 virtual machines in our campus cloud. We've got 2 different Amazon cloud servers that are running, one that we're setting up, a third one that we're setting up. So, and these are students that are setting up and configuring this. They're installing the software. They're installing Postgres. They're installing SDE. They're setting up all the accounts. The next machine will have PostGIS that we're kind of diving into. And so, these are experiences that they realize, like, I can't mess this up. I can't mess this up. And I think putting them in that situation, there's a lot of growth that occurs really quickly. The PostGIS back in. And I do have a lot of IT students that do some of this stuff. So I do keep some of it away from students that I know that aren't going to be able to handle it. And so we've had, I think, the program manager is essential. We're rehiring. We've been about 6 months without a program manager, and I'm about to lose my mind because I've been trying to do 2 jobs at once. And so things are looking good. I'm trying to remember. Oh yeah, here we go. Some of the challenges that we've run across, some of the things that were unanticipated, is that a lot of the work that goes into supporting an organization like this, even though we're relatively small, at most we've had probably 12 students working for us, is that I think one point during the grant I had 6 different accounts that I had to keep track of, all with different rules. And that the finances, this is someone's sick joke that our finance system is called wisdom. And that this tells me anything that's useful or relevant. So we ended up having to come up with 2 different tracking systems. One was we did have to pay attention to this, someone said we had to. And we had to come up with our own project management system in order to figure out actually how much money we'd spend on any individual project. So some overhead. The universities are not really set up, or at least ours isn't, for entrepreneurial activity. There's a lot of disincentives to making things like this happen. Again, I was pre-tenure, and I tried to figure out in my tenure application where I should put any of this effort, which was tremendous. Yeah. And all along the road, well, no, it doesn't belong in teaching. This wasn't in a class. But they learned something. No, it doesn't go in teaching. It's not research, but it was a grant, but no, it doesn't count as research. You don't publish anything else, so it doesn't count as research. All right, well, service. Can I go in service? Well, we're not sure. All right, those are my 3 bins. Where do I put this? So it's been really frustrating, and I think one of the things that we've tried to do is transform our institution from within. Given that we've got a strong business college, and we can talk later if someone's interested in, like, you know, is anything you're doing, is this legal? Can you do work for clients? Oh, you got Esri license here. These are academic licenses. I've had like 5 different conversations with Esri. Is this okay? Is this okay? Are you sure we can do this? And so all the answers I've gotten back is, yeah, you're good as long as it's students doing it as part of their education. So tracking this stuff, I've just been blown away at how much time I spent on reporting and the accounting. I found a good financial person. I'm deeply in love, and I'm going to do everything I can possibly do to keep that person happy. Some of the successes, I see students like this. These guys are kind of goofy anywhere else. And I said, all right, you're going to go in front of a county board and talk about what you spent your summer doing. They show up in business suits. I barely recognize them, and they do a great job presenting the work that they've done, mapping assets across the county, and it leads to us getting another contract. Students that have turned some of the work into undergraduate research, and so we do get some research components out of this. And probably the biggest thing that we're excited about is what happens after these guys graduate. And unfortunately, one of the challenges is they do graduate, pretty much have to start with a whole new staff every 12 months. And that's a little different than other centers, let's say at a graduate level, is that these guys, at most, do I get a year out of them before they graduate. But compared to, and this is anecdotal data, and I might be biased, but our students that are coming out of the center are much more likely to get full-time work that they stay in. They're not just internships, they're not working in a coffee shop, and they're doing things that they're proud of. If I talk to the students that were doing interviews before the center, I would hear things, well, there were questions they asked me I didn't know the answers to. Or actually, I had some students come back who had gotten jobs and said, you guys aren't teaching us the stuff that we need to know. Now my students come back from interviews telling me, I think I know more than they do. Mm-hmm. And that they go into the organizations and they get hired because they know the web-based GIS in ways that others don't. So Punchline, thinking about trying to make academia relevant to broader society and figuring out what do we do to transform ourselves. Now, there's been a lot of attention paid to MOOCs and the efficiencies of MOOCs, and I think those scare the hell out of all of us for what academia is going to look like in 5-10 years. I think something like this is part of the answer. I think that these intensive project-based high-impact practices, leap learning, essential learning outcomes, whatever you want to call them, that this applied experience, these are the types of things that we can offer to our students that really transform what their undergraduate experiences are like. Mm-hmm. They come out of here much more confident, with much deeper skills, and overlaid with some of these professional skills that I would challenge any of you probably to find on a syllabus for any geography class that exists out there. How to present yourself in a public meeting. How to write a professional email and not just say, oh, it's done. So, I'll kind of end there and say that's our story. And I'd be interested on feedback on kind of this idea that how do we make our campuses and our institutions more amenable to these types of learning experiences, and how do we get credit for doing it? So thank you.
So I have 2 questions. One is, have you connected at all with OSGO's learning labs, teaching labs system that they have?
Short answer, no. No, I mean, there's obviously a lot of different learning resources. And the open source, I'm going to try to get back to the open source in the fall. I really retrenched from that because of the lack of programming experience that my students have, and I have not found any support from the computer science department to give my students that training. So I've really isolated. I find those students are really interested in the programming, and those are the ones that I have work with the IT students and learn how to do some of the JavaScript and so forth. But I'll spend some more time looking to see if there's a resource that I'm missing out on.
Cool. Yeah, they have a repository, I forget what it's called, but it has some, curriculum and resources and stuff using open source software that's worth, maybe worth checking out. I don't know.
Awesome.
The other question I had was, how is your gender balance? Do you have any trouble attracting female students?
You kidding? It's been up and down. For a while, I think I could pull up that alumni page. We're probably 25-75. The IT students have all been male. The GIS students probably 40% women, and almost always the better students, and then 60% men. And the designers have all been women that have been part of the team. Anything else? Yeah, Drew.
So, at the time they got this economic development grant, are there numerous cost centers, pseudo businesses running across campus? You're not unique at Whitewater, are you?
You mean the new centers?
Yeah.
I was the only one that was new.
Oh, okay.
So
the
the
other
business college had various centers that already existed
Okay.
that received money for some of the activities that they did. But we were the only new partner that was created by the grant.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you're interested at all in disaster-related components of some of the general problems of getting around campus. We just had fire drills yesterday, and today tornado drills, and that reminds us that people with disabilities could have problems locating safe places on campus and all that. And I'm just wondering if that's an issue that your products can solve. And if not, perhaps a liability might have something to do with it. That something that is that mission critical that absolutely has to work needs to be configured and tested in a way that maybe just an informational system would.
Expanding on that tool for students with disabilities, there's been discussions about adding a winter component, and that the students would know where the plows had run.
Oh, okay.
So putting GPS units on the plows so that they could that day pull up and figure out which routes had been plowed and which hadn't. That would probably be the next step that we would go to. Police services have been bugging me for a long time for having GIS support, real-time GIS support to know where their officers are. That's the only other thing that we've done right now. And my guess is that we would be a long way from anything that would be like mission critical. There was some discussion about potentially I can track who's using that. So I would know, so on the back end we're keeping that information, so I could know where there was a student in a wheelchair if we had everyone using it. So the possibility exists that there could be a tool like that. All right, well, thank you everybody.